this live is because it became apparent yesterday in the International Scrapbook Day group that we're in at the moment that not everybody is a scrapbooker. And although there's lots of people who are looking forward to doing the mini book this afternoon, there's a group of people who haven't scrapbooked before but would like to know more. Good morning, Bronwyn. Now, this is very impromptu. I haven't planned a great deal, although I have made myself some notes. And I just want to give you a very, very basic overview about what scrapbooking is to me, because it's something different to everybody. And what I thought I would cover this morning is what is scrapbooking, what sort of sizes you can scrapbook in so that you have an idea, because there's all sorts of options. We're going to talk about rules of scrapbooking. We're going to talk about some terminology that's used in scrapbooking. And I'm going to give you some hints and tips that I have found useful in my scrapbooking. So please feel free to ask questions. Mark's knocking about here, complaining he hasn't got any tea. And whilst he's here, I think we'll use him. So if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments, and Mark will direct me to answer them if I'm not looking properly. So, what is scrapbooking? For me, scrapbooking is about recording my life and the life of my family. Now, you might not know this, but I actually have a degree in history, mainly medieval, which is totally irrelevant, but I specialised in social history, and I think that shows to me that I've always had this lifelong interest in how people live. Okay, Celia, great question. It's on my list, so don't worry, I'm going to cover that. So I like to know how people live. I'm fascinated by the lives of my grandparents, my great-grandparents, whose photographs I have, but I know very little about. And I just want to leave some sort of record of the things that me and my family have done for future generations. So from a historical point of view, scrapbooking is really important, I think. However, scrapbooking is really, really, really so much more than that. Scrapbooking is an opportunity for us to create and to use our imagination and our creativity to produce what are works of art. It doesn't matter what your style of scrapbooking is, whether that is something very simple or whether you are really into lots of layering and mixed media scrapbooking. The point of scrapbooking is simple, and that is enjoyment. You have to enjoy the process, and you have to enjoy making your scrapbook layouts. I've been amazed in the current world how many people don't have a hobby, and I wonder what they do with themselves all day, because when you have a creative hobby, you have a world to escape into that you can focus on. It is excellent for our mental health. There are so many reasons why scrapbooking is an excellent hobby to have. But for me, my daughter kind of summed it up for me one day. When she was quite a lot younger, I said, I don't know why I bother scrapbooking, because when I die, all of these scrapbooks are just going to go into the bin. And her response was, no, Mum. When you die, I'm going to make sure that all of your scrapbooks are out on the shelf where people can see them and not hidden away like you hide them away. And that made me think, and that made me understand that scrapbooking is more than just us. It really is something that people, our families and our friends are interested in, seeing our lives and how we record them. So for me, that's what scrapbooking is. It's twofold. It's about recording my life and my history, and it's about having fun and being creative. So, what sizes generally do people scrapbook in? The most common size is 12 by 12. This size. This is a layout I did celebrating my daughter's 18th birthday. She's 21 next week, actually, as it happens. Yeah, in just a few days. And unfortunately, we're not going to see her next weekend because of the situation. But I am looking forward very much to seeing her as soon as this whole thing's over. But this is a layout, like I said, that just celebrates her 18th birthday, and it is 12 by 12. And when I say 12 by 12, I mean 12 inches square. It's really that simple and that obvious. This is the most traditional size of a scrapbook page. However, this isn't the only size of scrapbooking. Another popular size is what we call a traveller's notebook. Now, if you're in my Paper Scissors story group, last week or the week before, we made some little inserts for our traveller's notebooks. And traveller's notebooks come in many different sizes. But just as an example, this is a size of a traveller's notebook. I like traveller's notebook scrapbooking because it's small and it's quick and it's easy. So I'm just going to move that to one side. And I'm just going to show you an example of some layouts that I've done here. This is some memories of a weekend we had a couple of Easters ago when we went away, Mark and I, with Mel and her family up to the Lake District. And I've been able to put some little photos, some journaling. I am going to go over all of this terminology later. But I've just been able to record what was an absolutely incredible weekend. So this is what we would describe as traveller's notebook sized scrapbooking. Okay, now a lot of people also scrapbook in A4 size. Now, whether you're in the UK or America or wherever, A4 size can mean lots of different things. But in England and the UK, it roughly equates to about 8 1/4 by 11 3/4 inches. It isn't a size I've ever scrapbooked, but I believe that there are people in this group who do scrapbook in A4 size. And if you want to put some pictures of some of your layouts up in the group, that would be absolutely incredible. The joy of A4 size is if you're just starting out and you don't have any of these fancy sort of scrapbooks, which I'll come on to in a minute, you can just use an ordinary file, an ordinary ring binder file and page protectors to keep your layouts in. So that makes it nice and easy. The other thing that I will just quickly mention as well, which sometimes is separate from scrapbooking but actually isn't, is mini books. Now, as you know, I love making mini books, but the point of mini books is to record our photos, and it's exactly the same as scrapbooking, it's just in a different format. So it doesn't matter whether you make an 8 by 8 scrapbook, a 6 by 8 scrapbook, it doesn't matter. All sizes are totally 100% acceptable. And one of the things that I love to do with my layouts is I like to frame them. And if you saw our front room, we have those IKEA sort of the little shelves all the way around the room, and they are filled with scrapbook layouts that I've framed. So wherever I look, I have happy memories. So there's all sorts of ways that you can display your layouts. So just as an example, a lot of my scrapbooks are actually, or my layouts are kept in scrapbooks. Now you can get the ones with the ring binders down, not the ring binders, the spiral bound ones, which you can fill up with your own layouts. You can either glue layouts to each page, or you can scrapbook directly onto that page. This is what we call a D-ring layout here, scrapbook even. I do know what I'm talking about. I don't. And this is a very popular way of displaying your scrapbook layouts. This is one of the first ones that I ever did. My beautiful daughter, 21 next week, she was less than 24 hours in this one. So this is a D-ring way of keeping my layouts together. And that is a really, really common way of having our layouts. Another scrapbook uses a post-bound system, which is quite an old-fashioned way of perhaps displaying our layouts. I transferred all of my post-bound books into these D-rings at the beginning of the year, otherwise I'd show you those, but you'll still find a lot of scrapbooks out there are the post-bound system, which actually holds pages together rather differently. So the pages would look together like this in a D-rings, in a post-bound scrapbook, which is wonderful if you're doing 2-page layouts. Okay, so that's just an example there of how we might display our layouts in a 12 by 12 scrapbook. Now, the next thing that I said that I would talk to you about is rules. And the rules are these. There are none. Scrapbooking is totally about enjoying yourself, immersing yourself in creating your memories and your history and just putting things together on paper. There are some technical suggestions that I could make about scrapbooking, and that is purely in terms of a phrase that you will often hear in scrapbooking circles, which is acid free or archival safe. These are phrases that were used very much at the beginning of scrapbooking, because I'm sure we all have photograph albums that we maybe made as kids where we might have used sellotape to stick things into our books, and over time that sellotape has become brown and discoloured, and it has not ruined, but it's not helped the quality of our scrapbooks. I should find for you actually one that I did. I think probably the first scrapbook I ever made, I think I was about 12 years old when the first space shuttle went up into space, and I was so amazed by this that I cut out lots and lots of newspaper clippings and I put them together in a scrapbook, but I have used sellotape and it's all discoloured and it's all falling to bits. If I say archival safe or acid free, what that means is that the articles that I am using, whether it is paper or whether it is adhesive, is acid free, and it is the acid in those day-to-day items that will discolour and will change the look of our papers and our adhesives. So if you are wanting to make sure that your scrapbooks will last for hundreds of years, then look at archival safe and look at acid-free items. Most scrapbooking paper will actually be acid-free. Some glues are, for example, and I'm not trying to sell, I'm just showing as an example. This glue that I use a lot, it says Hobby and Craft pH neutral. It is acid free, so that glue that I'm using I know will not discolour over time and show through any of my papers. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. There are no rules when it comes to designing pages and doing your scrapbooking. The only rule is to have fun and create. There are a lot of rules out there in the scrapbooking world. One of them I break regularly, and I'm going to just talk briefly about that, and that is about handwriting on layouts. I'll talk a little bit about journaling when I come to terminology, but there is a rule out there that states that you should always handwrite on your layouts and not type in, print out, whatever. This is a great rule. I know this is a great rule because yesterday Mark and I made some millionaire shortbread from a notebook that I have that belonged to my grandmother, that was passed to my mother and then was passed to me. And this book is a family book of family recipes, and it has all of our handwriting in it. So whether it's mine, my dad's, my grandmother's, both of them, my mother's, I love that book because I open it and I can see the handwriting of my family and it's joyful. However, my handwriting is awful and I hate it. and I will not use it on my layouts. So that is a rule that I flout a lot. I type in my journaling and I print it out. That's my choice. But there are things that you can do to get around that. If you want to write on your layouts but you don't like your handwriting, then you can, and Mel is the master of this, write your journaling and tuck it inside or tuck it underneath you know, one of your photos or something on your layout. So that is a good rule, because it is wonderful to see the handwriting of our ancestors, but it's not one that I follow, and that's my reasons why. Now, when it comes to designing, there are a few little things that I've picked up over the years that I like to try and use in my scrapbooking, and one of those is about odd numbers. Now, I'm no designer. When I'm putting a scrapbook layout together, I just faff with it until it looks good. So I'm not going to give you any sort of fancy rules for designing, because I don't know them. I am a hobby scrapbooker. I am not a professional graphic designer. That's a great idea, Natalie. Journaling on the back of your layouts. Absolutely, Sarah. Putting the date on the layout is fantastic. I think that's a really, really good tip. So if you're going to scrapbook chronologically, then yeah, that's a great idea to make sure that things are all going in the right order. So when it comes to designing, the two tips that I've kind of picked up over the years are odd numbers are great. If you are putting things on a layout, you'll notice that most of the time I use an odd number of things. I have 3 photographs on this layout. Here, gosh, it's obviously a thing. I have 3 photographs on that layout. On here, I've got a block of 9. There is something about odd numbers that just works really well from a design point of view. So a little tip that I would say there is to use odd numbers of things on your layouts. There is something called the golden rule as well, which you might like to look up on Google, and it's something to do with a placement. I can't quite remember what it is, but I remember reading it and thinking that it made sense to me. So do have a look at that. The other rule that I wanted to just touch on is about journaling. Now, this is a phrase that we use a lot in scrapbooking, and journaling means to tell the story in writing. Ellie's right. Who, when, where is a good place to start. Now, in my previous life, I worked in public relations, and I wrote an awful lot of press releases, and we used the 5 W's, which has got an H in it as well. But the 5 W's are who, where, when, what, why, and how. Don't know how the how crept in, but it does. And that is a really good place to work from with our journaling, because that is about telling the story. Now, I'm actually not that good at doing journaling on my layouts. However, just for an example, going back to my traveller's notebook here, I have done a little bit of journaling here on this page. This is just an explanation of what these photos are. So I've put staying with friends in a gorgeous holiday cottage in the lakes. Heaven, I love magnolia trees, and then I took some photos of the magnolia trees there. So journaling is telling the story. There is another phrase which might be useful for you to know, which is digital scrapbooking. This is something that comes up from time to time. Digital scrapbooking is when you use a computer graphics program to design your scrapbook pages on a computer. It's not something I've done, because I like to faff with paper, quite frankly, but there are a lot of amazing digital scrapbookers out there. You can either then keep your scrapbook pages on your computer, or I believe you can have them printed out in 12 by 12 size and then add them into one of your scrapbooks. There is also the term hybrid scrapbooking, which is where you do a lot of your work on the computer, print it out, and then add things, paper items, to your scrapbooking as well. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is terminology. Okay, we've discussed journaling. This is important to tell the story of your scrapbooking, but I've got a whole load of words here, and thanks to the DT team for helping me out with this morning. In no particular order, I'm just going to go through a few words that you might hear about scrapbooking. You will hear the word crop. This can mean several things. Traditionally, a crop is a get-together of people who scrapbook. So for instance, today would actually have been a day that my Crop Central, would have met in Staffordshire, and this is a group of people who get together and we chat and we eat cake and we drink coffee and we scrapbook together and we just get inspiration from each other. And crops will normally meet maybe once a month or so. You can have online crops, which essentially is kind of what we're doing this weekend. It's also called a cyber crop. However, crop has other meanings as well. When we talk about cropping our photos, what that means is that we cut them down to the size that we want. So, for example, here's a photograph that I printed out yesterday that I'm going to be using in a little book that I'll show you in a class on Wednesday. And what I'm going to do with this photo is it's too big for the space that I want. And to be honest with you, all I want is that picture of my daughter. So I'm going to cut it down to the size that I want. And that is also called cropping. Another term that you might like to know is matting. Now, matting is when, and here's an example, I've taken my cropped photo and I have put it onto a piece of plain cardstock. It doesn't have to be plain cardstock, it can be patterned paper. But the reason why we do this is because it makes our photographs pop. It makes them stand out. So this is what matting is all about, and you'll see that I've done it on 99% of the photographs that I use. I haven't matted these exactly, but I have used a frame to put them in. Here on this one, this is a oh my god, the cat's just pooped. Oh, hang on a minute, I'm sending Mark out to deal with this. Glad we haven't got smelly vision. So here you can see a double mat. I've matted onto black card and onto white card, and that makes my photo really stand out. On this layout, I've matted this photograph onto white and I've sewn around it. It's a really, really common thing to do to mat our photos, okay? Layering is exactly what it sounds like. I've just put up the challenge in challenge 3, which is about layering up, and layering up is what makes our pages really interesting. So for example, let me grab this one. This is a good example about layering. Here you can see that I've got underneath at the bottom, I've got some squares. I have then layered my die cut, and I'll come on to that. I have layered my die cut frame, I have got my photograph, and then my die cuts that I've just added in. That is layering, and it adds a lot of interest to my layouts. You will also hear the phrase quite often, fussy cutting. That phrase, I think, is a peculiarly American phrase. To us English people, it's cutting out. So when we have a piece of scrapbook paper, and I'm just going to grab some 12 by 12 papers that I have here, and I'm going to show you. This would be an example. Here I have this gorgeous umbrella scrapbook paper. Fussy cutting means that I cut out each of these items individually. Okay, and then we can use them on our layouts. So for example, here, this is a die cut, what we call die cuts. But if I didn't have die cuts that fitted this layout, I could fussy cut from my patterned paper and use the patterns that I have cut as die cuts. Okay, so that's another phrase that you might hear. Other phrases, cardstock. Cardstock is basically the plain papers that we might use on our layouts. Come in every colour of the rainbow and then some, but this is generally slightly thicker than patterned paper, but it's always a great base to start from. But that's what cardstock means. You will also have heard the phrase cut file. I am sure if Sadie's knocking about, this is a phrase that she jokes about a lot. But a cut file, if you haven't heard of one, is a piece of most often cardstock, but not necessarily, that is cut usually on a cutting machine. Now I have a scan and cut, which cuts out my cut files for me. But here, let me show you. I've got a couple. These are Page Taylor Evans cut files. This is a cut file. I've cut this shape into a piece of cardstock that I've then used on my layout, and I've put paper behind. Okay, so this is a cut file. This is another cut file, another Page Taylor Evans cut file, and I will put pattern paper behind those and then add those to my layouts. Okay. Now, you'll have also heard the term embellishments used a lot. Now, embellishments can be anything. Embellishments, for example, in this particular layout, are my sequins, my fussy cut leaves, my cut files, here, the flowers, this 3D printed title. These are all embellishments. We also talk about ephemera. Ephemera is the interesting bits that make our layouts and our mini books even more interesting. And I don't think, just off the top of my head, with the layouts that I've grabbed, that I actually do have any ephemera on them. But ephemera is the extra bits. So say, for instance, we've had a day out at the seaside. What have I got here? I've got some photos of, oh, I haven't got the one that I'd hoped for, but basically this is my daughter and my niece, and we just come out of the arcade. Now, if you're at the seaside and you're at the arcade, one of the things that you get is tickets, don't you? Always fun to keep. Put them in your layouts, put them in your mini books. That is ephemera. It's all the extra bits and pieces. My daughter and Mark always used to joke as well with me that if we were going out on a day trip, they'd come to me with things like ketchup packets and sugar packets and go, "Mum, do you want this for your scrapbook?" Well, sometimes they weren't far wrong actually, but that I would class as ephemera. Okay? You will have heard the anachronism DT. That stands for design team. A design team is a group of people who will help a scrapbooking manufacturer or a business to showcase their products. So the idea would be that if you are on a design team, you are sent items from that manufacturer or from that shop, and you will then use those items to produce layouts, okay, which the shop or the manufacturer will then use to show their products in the best way. Another, is it an anachronism that you will hear is PL, or Project Life. This is a totally other way to scrapbook, which I guess has fallen out of favour to some degree in the last few years, but it's something that I personally love when something's done quickly. Now I'm just going to show you quickly what that might be, but this would be a Project Life, a pocket scrapbooking page as an example. Not quite finished, but Project Life pocket scrapbooking is when our page protector, which is this plastic bit here, has pockets, all individual, in which we've added separate little items. Okay, so I've got a little shaker pocket there. I've got some pictures of my daughter with fussy cut bits of paper here. I've got lots of matting and layering, and I've got still some more to do, but that would be proper, that would be Project Life or pocket scrapbooking. This is great if you want to add little interesting pages into your own scrapbooking. Now we talk about things like scrap lifts. Celia, you wanted to know what a scrap lift was. Scrapbooking is one of the few hobbies where it is perfectly acceptable to steal, providing you credit the original designer. So, for example, in our International Scrapbook Day celebrations, also known as INSD, another little anachronism for you there, I might give you that layout and ask you to scrap lift it. And what I'm asking you to do is basically copy it, but copy it and put your own slant on it. So you might decide that what you're going to do is these 9 squares and put in your own version of it. So scrap lifting, Tracy, it wouldn't be the first time. So scrap lifting is about stealing a design, but it is perfectly 100% acceptable to do. In fact, there are whole Facebook groups, the Scrap Squad, for instance, who do this on a regular basis. But it is good show to credit the people who are the original designers. Okay. Another phrase or word that you might hear is mood board. Now, if you have a look at our International Scrapbook Day wildcard challenge, for which Mel was our guest designer, you will see that there is a mood board attached to that. Now, a mood board gives you some suggestions for colours or themes that you might like to incorporate into your layout. Okay, so that's got lots of gentle greys and pink colours in it. So what that means is that you would look at that mood board and maybe take the colourings and put those into your own layout. Okay, is this all making sense to people? Are we all happy, or have I talked too much? Because the last thing that I want to do with you is actually give you a few little hints and tips that I have discovered on my scrapbooking journey. So, hints and tips. This layout, or this one might be better to show you. Another thing that I do to mat and layer and make my photos pop is I use a nail file, an ordinary common garden nail file, and I gently scrape it around the edges of my photo, and it gives a distressed look. I'm hoping you guys can see that, and I think that is a really cool way of making my photos just that little bit more interesting. You can see, oh look, there's Jason Momoa. Don't know how he got in there. Oh look, there's my beautiful husband, even better. He's so long suffering, isn't he? You can see here that I've distressed the edges of my photographs, and I think that gives a really interesting sort of extra added level to my layouts. So I do that quite a lot. The other thing that I was going to talk to you about was paper tearing, and I have an example here. This is very useful when we come to matting and layering, and particularly layering. Here's an example. I have used torn paper to give an interesting distressed edge to my papers that I've used on this layout. Now, to get that white core showing, what you need to do is to take your paper and tear it towards you. I'm just going to see if I can just grab some paper somewhere. Okay, so just for an example, here's just a piece of paper I've just grabbed. It's pink on one side and it's got patterns on the other. But I want this paper and I want it to have a white edge. So I'm going to tear that paper towards me. If you're paper tearing little and often would be my hint to you. But as you can see there, I've now got that white edge which is quite, it stands out, doesn't it? It just gives us maybe another aspect to something that we can do to make our scrapbooking look interesting. Now, the last thing you'll be delighted to hear that I'm going to talk about is page sketches. If you are a new scrapbooker, you will find page sketches absolutely invaluable. We have used a page sketch in one of our previous International Scrapbook Day challenges. I'm just trying to think which one it was. I think it was number 1. It was Adventure is Out There, where we had a rough and simple design for a scrapbook page that looked like a sketch, and from that Kerry made a layout that fitted. Now, one of the best places to go to for sketches, I think, is Pinterest. And if you go onto my website, you'll see that there's a link on there to my Pinterest boards. And one of the Pinterest boards that I have is 2 sketches that I've found that have interested me. I will put the link up in the group as well, so you might find that quite useful. A page sketch is really interesting because it will give you an idea, it gives you a place to start. So if you are a newbie scrapbooker and you're worried about designing your own, you can look at a sketch and it will tell you where you might like to place your photo. It will tell you where you might like to place some flowers, and it is really, really helpful. Okay, now I said that was the last thing that I was going to mention, but I just want to quickly touch on a fairly newish phenomenon, which is mixed media scrapbooking. Now, Kerry does the most beautiful mixed media scrapbooking pages, and all that means is that you are using more than patterned paper to make your layouts. You are adding interest to your layouts through paint, through stamping, through splatters. For instance, if you look at the back of this here, you'll see that I've got some paint splatters. There is so many crossover crafts that you can bring into your scrapbooking. Mixed media scrapbooking as well, for me, also incorporates sewing. So for example, you'll see that I sew on a lot of my layouts. So on this one, I've sewn around the edge, I've sewn across my title, I've sewn around that circle there. I have used my sewing machine to do that. You can hand sew. Paige Taylor Evans hand sews the most beautiful pages, and she uses a lot of her own cut files to sew onto. But if you aren't a sewer, you can always just draw it. So for example, on this layout, rather than sew, I've just used my black pen and I've just drawn around the outside. Okay, so there we go. I hope that has been useful for any newbie scrapbookers. If you've got any questions, just pop them on this thread here. I'll be happy to answer where I can. And I hope that it's given you some ideas of where to start, because if you haven't scrapbooked before, I can totally understand that it is daunting. So my recommendation to you is to go out, find some page sketches, look at the challenges in the group and just have fun. So thank you for joining me today. The last thing I want to do is wish every single one of you a very, very happy International Scrapbook Day. And I will be back at 3 p.m. here to teach you this little mini book here. The tutorial is now posted in the group, so if you want to get ahead with your cutting, you can do so. So thank you for letting me witter on, and I will speak to you all soon. Just want to mention as well, because there's always something else, that there is a lot of experience in this group. So if you do have any questions, if you're looking at somebody's layout and you want to know how they did something, just ask. All scrapbookers love to talk about what they do, so just ask questions and anybody will be happy to answer you. So enjoy yourself, guys. Let's get back to our scrapbooking, and I'll see you all really soon. I'm off to make a cuppa.
Bye.